Most people think that songwriters and composers sit down and just play any random notes that they like the sound of. And maybe that music is a mysterious creative process where you can play anything. But the truth is that the choices that a composer actually has are incredibly limited. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how a songwriter starts with what seems like an overwhelming amount of choices, but actually ends up with almost no choices at all. So let's get into it. Now, first of all, the piano itself has 88 different keys. And even if you are writing a song that is not on the piano, the number of notes that are on any given instrument is probably not that dissimilar. On a guitar, there are 138 different notes that you can play, but a lot of those notes repeat on different strings, so you end up with only 47 unique notes that you can play. But either way, regardless of what instrument you are using, instead of there being 88 notes, for example, on a piano, there are only 12 unique notes. The very lowest note on a standard piano is an A, and then we just go through the alphabet until we get to G, and then it repeats over and over again. So we get A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on. So that's 7 of the notes, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, and then we have the 5 black notes that go in between those, which are called sharps and flats. The word sharp just means one up, so if I play an A, and I want to play an A sharp, then I'll play the black key one up from an A, and the word flat just means one down, so if I play a B, and I want to play a B flat, I'll play one down from a B, which is the same key as an A sharp. So A sharp and B flat are the same key on the piano. And that gives us the 12 unique notes. So this means although there are 88 keys on the piano, a songwriter only has 12 of those to work with, and then they just repeat on the piano. But it actually is much more narrow than that, because they don't even have 12 notes to work with. Pretty much every song that has ever existed, except for the really bizarre, weird songs, uses something called a scale to narrow those 12 notes down even further. And a scale is just a set of notes that work well together. Now, typically, this will be a major or a minor scale, which uses one of each letter. So there will be a type of A, a type of B, a type of C, D, E, F, and G. But we could have an A sharp instead of an A, or we could have an A flat instead of an A, or we could have a B flat instead of a B, or we could have a B sharp instead of a B. But we'll still only have one version of each of those letters. Now, because there are 7 letters in the musical alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, this narrows those 12 notes down to just 7 of them. So an example of this is a C major scale, which uses just the white notes. It doesn't use any sharps or flats. So that scale is the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. And then it just repeats again. C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. So if a song is written in the key of C major, then it's those notes that it's going to use, those 7 notes. The other 5 notes, in this case that's the black notes, are pretty much off limits for that song. Unless, of course, the song changes and starts using a different scale for some reason. However, in typical pop songs, they don't really change key that often, so if you are in the key of C, those are the 7 notes you're going to be using. Another example of a scale is the scale of D major, which has an F sharp instead of an F, and a C sharp instead of a C. So that scale is the notes D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, and C sharp. Those are the 7 notes that are in the key of D major. So if a song is in the key of D major, then it'll only be using those 7 notes. Either way, we've now narrowed down the 12 possible notes to just 7. Now, it actually doesn't even stop there. A songwriter has even less choice than that. Songs are made up of 2 main components. They're made up of chords and melodies. Chords provide the color and the kind of background blend of notes that work well together, and the melody provides you a narrative and kind of something to listen to. So in order to make chords, we can make chords starting on each of the notes within a scale, and we do that by playing alternating notes. We play every other note in the scale. So in a C scale, which was the scale that just used the white notes, C, D, E, F, G, A, and B, to play chord 1 in that scale, we would start on note 1, and we'll play every other note. So we'd have a C, we'd have an E, and we'd have a G, like this. And this is chord 1 using a scale of C major. Chord 2 would start on note 2, so that'd be D, F, and A. Chord 3 would start on note 3, E, G, and B. Chord 4 would start on note 4, F, A, and C. And so on, until you have 7 chords, one starting on each of those notes. Now, if a song was in the key of D, for example, using those other set of 7 notes, then the chords would use those notes instead. So chord 1 would be a D, an F sharp, and an A, because in a D major scale, there was an F sharp instead of an F. So chord 1 would be D, F sharp, and A. Chord 2 would be E, G, and B. Chord 3 would be F sharp, A, and C sharp, and so on. Now, when we play chords in a song, songwriters are not going to pick just a random set of chords from those 7 chords. The first thing to say is that chord 7 in a scale sounds more unusual than the other 6 chords, and that is because that is something called a diminished chord. It sounds kind of shocking. So songwriters also pretty much rarely use that chord, which already means they only have 6 other chords to choose from. So as of right now, we have 6 chords that we can possibly use to write a song. And we also have 7 notes in the scale that we can use to make a melody. But actually, we have even less choice than that. In probably 90 to 95% of cases, a piece of music will start using chord 1. When a listener is listening to a song, at the very beginning, they don't know what they're listening to yet, until you've played some notes. And in order to make it obvious and predictable and comfortable for a listener to work out what's going to happen in the song, it's usually a good idea to establish which scale we're listening to. And the way that we do that, in most cases, is by playing chord 1 first. So if I'm playing a song and that song is in the key of C major, if I play a C chord, chord 1, using a C major scale, then that kind of establishes that scale for me. Someone who's listening to a song doesn't need to know anything about music in order for that to do that. Naturally, when you hear the first chord in a song, you're going to be able to naturally predict which notes will sound good in that piece of music and which notes won't. For example, if I played that chord, but then played one of the black notes, that would sound pretty terrible. And the reason for that is because when I play this chord, I'm expecting all of these notes, not these notes. Secondly, in order to punctuate music, in order to tell us when a sentence has finished in music, we use chords in order to do that. So if we want to see a period or a full stop in the music, we use a certain set of chords. And if we want to see a comma in the music, we use a different set of chords. Just a quick interruption to let you know that on Wednesday, the 22nd of April, I am opening a brand new community called The Practice Room. The community is for piano learners who want to share progress, get feedback, find other piano learners, and ask me questions directly. If that sounds of interest to you, then you can join the waiting list with the link in the description. And everyone on the waiting list will have the chance to join at a discounted price before it opens to everyone else. I'm also working on some extra resources exclusively for members, including, for example, a searchable database full of popular pieces with exactly what difficulty level those pieces are, exactly what challenges that piece has, and will help you develop. I will also be making all of the Piano Practice Daily articles that feature within my videos available to members. So if that sounds of interest to you, then feel free to join the waiting list with the link in the description. Okay, back to the video. So if I want to put a full stop or a period in the music, I will use chord 5 and then chord 1, which in a C major scale is a G chord going to chord 1, which is a C chord. So chord 5 to chord 1 is a full stop or a period in the music. But if I want to put a comma in the music instead, then I can reverse that and I can put chord 1 going to chord 5. So I could play a C chord to a G chord. And that'll feel like a comma, unlike the music needs to continue. So on a very simple level, you could have something like this. Chord 1. Chord 5. Chord 1. And that'll feel complete and finished, like it's got a full stop or a period at the end of that sentence. But if I reverse those final 2 chords and I play chord 1, and finish with chord 1 to 5, then that sounds like a comma and it sounds like it needs something else after it. Now, one other thing to know about how limited music actually is the fact that in most popular music and in early classical music, sentences are usually either 4 or 8 bars long. And if a bar, for example, is 4 counts, then you'll get 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that is 4 bars. So if each phrase is 4 or 8 bars long, and let's say we have 1 chord per bar, 1 chord every 4 counts, that means that if we have a 4-bar phrase, we have 4 chords we can choose. Yet we don't have 4 chords we can choose because the first chord has to be chord 1, and the third chord and fourth chord have to be chord 5 to 1 or chord 1 to 5. So really, at this point, we can choose 1 chord that goes in that second bar. Now, with the comma, you can actually play chord 1, 2, or 4 that goes to chord 5, not just chord 1 to 5. So if I choose a chord to go into that second space, I could have chord 1, chord 6, chord 4, and then chord 5. which is that 4-chord sequence that is used in a lot of pop music. And that is just because it starts on chord 1, so a listener knows which scale we're using. It finishes with chord 4 to 5, which is a comma in the music, and then I've just filled in that other space with chord 6. Now, if that's a comma, maybe I want a sentence after that is a full stop. So I might do chord 1, chord 4, chord 5, and then chord 1. And that will feel like the phrase is complete and finished. So actually, at this point, the choices that a songwriter has are really quite limited. Now, as for a melody is also very limited from just those 7 notes that are in the scale. Let's say the chord that we are playing is chord 1. Now, a melody needs to work with this chord. If it doesn't work with this chord, it's going to sound a little bit odd. For example, if I play every note in the scale except these 3 notes, it's going to feel kind of like it's not finished, or it doesn't work. And that is because a melody is always drawn towards the notes that are actually in the chord that's being played. We kind of want to hear the C's, the E's, and the G's in the melody. But if you only play C's, E's, and G's, those notes work, but it sounds really boring. So what typically happens is most of the time, a melody will be using notes from the chord, but it will also use something called passing notes and auxiliary notes. A passing note is exactly as it sounds, where it passes from one chord note to another. For example, you can have a G, which is in the chord, and then play a passing note of an F to get to an E, which is in the chord. So there's that moment where we're playing a note that isn't in the chord, but then it goes to a note that is in the chord. The other way that notes are typically used from the scale but that aren't in the chord is with auxiliary notes, and this is where you play a note that's in the chord, you go out of the chord, and then back into the chord, like this. So a G is in the chord, an A is not in the chord, but it is in the scale, and then a G is that same note again. In this case, that's an upper auxiliary because we're going up, out of the chord and back in. We can also play a lower auxiliary. So between passing notes and auxiliary notes, this tends to be how melodies function. You have the exact notes that are in the chord, but then you also have passing notes and auxiliary notes. And singers who make up melodies without really knowing what they're doing, which is most singers, let's be honest, they will be naturally doing this. They'll gravitate towards those notes that are actually in the chord at the time, and then they'll get to those notes via other notes in the scale. So to make a melody, you could do something like this. C, passing note of a D to an E, upper auxiliary, back to an E, passing note to a C, etc. And then when the chord changes, you have different notes that are in the chord and different notes you can use in the melody. So actually, although there are 7 notes in a scale that you can use in a melody, if you want it to sound nice and like it works, you don't even really have 7 notes you can use. You have the notes from the chord that you can use, and then you can navigate between them using the other notes. Now, in popular music, in order to make this not sound so boring, what they typically do is they have 3 different sets of chords that they'll use. There'll be one set of chords for the verse, there'll be another set of chords for a chorus, and then there'll be a final set of chords for a bridge section. And then popular songs are usually pieced together in some kind of structure like verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, for example. But I also want to say that while the underlying structure of pieces of music is very limited, and it is almost always the same, there are lots of choices that songwriters do have. For example, they can choose to embellish the chords. They can add extra notes to these chords. In a piano piece, for example, they can play them in lots of different places on the piano. You can use different instruments, you can play different rhythms, you can have different speeds, you can have different structures. There are lots of ways in which you can make music unique. However, the underlying logic is the same, which is great news if you are learning the piano or another instrument, and particularly if you want to write your own music. So now I'm going to play you a song that I'm going to make up using exactly the logic I've just explained. And I'm going to use the scale of C major. So just the white notes. It's going to start on chord 1. At the end of each phrase, I'm either going to play chord 1, 2, or 4 going to 5, or chord 5 going to chord 1, depending on whether I want a comma or a full stop, or a period. And then I'll use different sets of chords to have different sections in the song. Okay. So while there are a lot of choices that you can make with the texture of the music, how quick you're playing, all of those kind of things, the underlying structure behind all pieces of music is fairly logical. And if you can really understand that, then it really unlocks your ability to make music sound more interesting, because the choices that you are making are what gives that underlying structure personality. If you want to know what the most important chord is in music, then head on through and I will see you there.